Okay, we are live. And hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot and very happy to be here today. So I have Scott Perez, a scientist with me, and he can explain more about his background. I've actually interviewed him a few times. We've been on some shows together discussing some of what we're going to talk about today, but maybe today we'll go into more detail. So it's great to have you here, Scott. And we've been having behind the scenes discussions and whatnot. So let me put the banner up here on the show, just because this is a live show, and that way we'll sort of identify it here. Is that working? Yeah, in theory, that's working, right? Okay. So hopefully that's people can see that, and then I'll stop sharing that just to identify the show. It's good to have a raw, because this is raw video. It's just in action, and then later I clean it up and put it out again on Rumble, and it's on my YouTube channel right now, which is a relatively new YouTube channel, and so on. So anyway, here we are. So Scott, can you give yourself a good introduction so that people can understand your scientific background, especially? So put some emphasis on that so that the things that we're talking about can be understood in those terms.
Sure. So, my name is John S. Perez. I live in Tampa, Florida. It's blistering hot right now. Anyway, I was born and raised here, but I grew up playing video games back in, I was born in 68. So, in the 70s, it was Atari and video games, right? And I became interested in video games and computers. And I started in 1980 with the Atari 800 writing in GW Basic, which was the first language that Microsoft developed. So I got into computers that way. And I was into sports, of course. Baseball was quite a big deal with me, but I I chose to be pre-med first, and I was a biology major, and I changed my major. I was playing baseball in the SEC Division One at Mercer University, and I was trying to be pre med. Those two things are very difficult, so I had to give one up. And at the time, I was a sophomore at Mercer, and a friend of mine who was going to play in high school had type 1 gestational diabetes and died in a car accident. And we buried my other friends and I, we buried him. It was Paul Bear. And at the time, I was kind of, reflecting on life and going through these changes as a young adult. And I talked to a friend of mine's dad. His name is Dr. Alejandro de Quesada. He's one of the founders of Gatorade. Okay. He was a very intelligent man. University of Florida, went to University of Havana, came to the United States. And I talked to him and I said, Dr. De Quesada, I'm thinking about changing from pre-med and going in to chemistry to do research because I felt like I could make a change in the world that way. Not just because Mike Anderson, our friend, had just died, but because I had all these relatives that were getting sick and they were dying. And I didn't, I was a young adult and I didn't really uh, feel that I could make a change in the medical that would be a big deal, right? So all this time I'm using computers. Well, I shift to chemistry, and when I went into chemistry, things got a little bit more complex. We're talking about using instrumentation. We're talking about classes now that you have to use computers in order to pass the classes, to do the labs, to do everything. So that's when I started evolving from, hey, I'm just want to play video games into I got to do these things or I'm going to fail. And I hung up my cleats course, I was still playing softball, intramural, and in my fraternity, I was a SAE at Mercer. But anyway, I changed. So I went in that direction. And I, of course, co-opt with AudioBox, right? Which is a well-known company in the United States making chemical solutions and cleaning solutions for them. But I also did a huge amount of computer programming for them and the affiliated company that was in the marine business. So I started picking up languages, all of the technologies, Lotus 123, started with the beginning of Windows, went through just about every version. And that propelled me along with Dr. Hargrove, who is a captain level 6 full bird, Ollie North level, my mentor, expert in chemical warfare weapons at Mercer, okay, former U.S. Navy, along with Dr. Crawford, former U.S. Army, and several other professors there, including Leslie Garland, whose father's Carl Garland from MIT, who taught me physical chemistry and quantum mechanics, all those things. That propelled me to get a full ride to University of Nebraska Lincoln. And when I got there, I did. I went into the doctoral program in chemistry. I did research in cancer and aging. And I built an NIH facility there, core facility for computing and publishing and handling data for publications and analytics in this area of chemistry and biochemistry and molecular genetics. So when you go into graduate school, you're in an umbrella in chemistry, but you branch into a very specific area. Mine was biochemistry, and under that was molecular genetics. So heavy computing was used, and I introduced it and helped build that in this laboratory. We had a major presence on the internet at the time. We were one of the four largest, four Archie servers in the world for information. GenBank version 1 was created at that time. Okay. So GenBank holds all the genes. It was a tool to analyze genes, right? My doctoral committee was a crystallographer who had immense computing power. Okay. Silicon graphics, computing power with three-dimensional analytics. So you've got 8 knobs, you've got 3D goggles, you're looking at molecules and crystallography, $4 million four-circle diffractometer to get crystal structure information, and then tons of computing power behind that. So that started at the same time I was doing that. I was a consultant for J.C. Bradford, a gentleman by the name of Douglas E. Carper. At the same time I'm doing this is my little side job. These people had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and the San Francisco Exchange. So the things that we take for granted now, like the trading platforms and all of that are available to us, like Thinkorswim or E-Trade or any of these things, these people were doing that then live when nobody else was. They had live feeds, they had traces back to 1958, and they had the carte blanche technology. So I had a balance of a little bit of Wall Street in me at the same time as the science stuff. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of money over here. I better educate myself. And so I got computing on both sides, and I kind of went through. Well, went through all of that, and cancer and aging research allowed me to not only interact with but compete with Nobel laureates. So you're working at the cutting edge of science with computers, and you're working with some of the best talent, but you learn from them, and you compete with them. But when you have friction, it's with some of the best people. So, it's a challenge. Anyway, when I left there, at the time, I came back to Tampa, Florida, and there were not a lot of jobs in chemistry. I did some analytical chemistry. I worked in the oil business in the port here. I wrote almost all the software for Amalie Motor Oil. Their name's on the arena. 4 Arabs own the company. And then I was like, I've gone through all the school. I need to make some money. I was hired by the CIA, of course, in a hotel room, and that helped me to then evolve my career computer wise. When I was hired by the team under John Deutsch that was building the encryption for the United States military, including NIST, the Common Criteria encryption that's in theater today. So those interactions with people from Brookhaven National Laboratory, coders, Eva Bazoki, Aaron Friedman, who's Israeli Special Forces, and then meeting people all over the place, like Phil Zimmerman, who created PGP encryption, Bruce Schneier, just everybody you can imagine, and the experiences of working with people in the field at Norfolk and NATO and all of it, right? So I took all the coding I was doing at the oil plant. I came there. I wrote part of their business infrastructure. I became a product manager, making these products and helping build technology. We had something called the Living Lab, and there were other hackers that came into this. So part of my job interview was, can you tell us a little bit about hacking, or do you know anything about hacking or wares? And I told them how to hack Sierra Online games. And so then the phone rang, and I didn't know there were people watching me from the room next door. Anyway, when you put a lot of hackers together in a living lab, a lot of things come out, right? So we had fun hacking each other, learning how to hack, and then we built the security to protect against these hacks and put it into the operating system of the technology that we were not only commercially selling, but through the Black Project into the military and the government. And we were the first people to pass encrypted video through NATO and all that. So I was evolving in there. That was a startup, and I didn't really understand that there was a lot of money there because of the Black projects. They have money driving it, but it didn't appear that way to me. And again, I was trying to build my career. That company eventually got bought by General Dynamics, but I went, I left there because I wanted to, again, evolve my career and do more product work. So I ended up going into intermediate communications. NSA, former NSA contractors brought me in there. I didn't understand entirely what was there in terms of the United States military presence in the phone companies and all of that. That evolved into being bought by WorldCom and Verizon. And all along the way, I'm learning new languages, new techniques and languages. We're talking about surveillance systems that I built that monitored global data networks. Okay. Like the fourth largest frame relay and then network in the world, 9/11, all of EmpireNet in New York. And then, of course, later, global data networks encompass and span the entire globe, frame relay and ATM, IP,
Okay.
customer service.
Now, let me ask a couple questions. So,
Yeah.
when you were doing that, were you dealing with satellites as well, programming satellites?
Okay. I didn't program satellites. I didn't. Okay. We went, as you know, you were born in Moffett Field. So I told you, when I was working in the Black company that got bought by General Dynamics,
Mm.
I went to Moffett Field and we talked to them about encrypting the satellites because they were being hacked. That was prior to that. After that, satellites in the telco company, um, they're all over the place. So the thing with the satellites is backhaul. So backhaul requires fiber build out in order to get high bandwidth. And so there was a company called AboveNet, but there's several other companies, and what they do is they provide you uplink. They provide you uplink. I
Okay,
wasn't
but
coding.
what was your, role relation in, you're saying you're sort of describing a playing field, but what was your role exactly related to this particular area? And was this still the NSA or was this another organization?
I was hired into the phone company as a civilian with a background. Um, as things progress and you go through mergers, you get bought by Verizon. Okay. And the next thing you find yourself, you've got a huge, and I mean, it's a huge, it's a Cisco network that is carrying large chunks of the internet. Right.
Sure.
And
I
in the,
mean, Xerox, Xerox had a special division that was
yes,
inventing all kinds of stuff. Do you know
right.
about that division? I forget what they were called, but they had a
All of these companies
famous
do
name. Yeah.
R&D
So
divisions.
you're talking about working in one of those kind of divisions in the phone company type, right?
I did exactly that for Dave Ruberg, but in Verizon, the problem with these companies are they typically rely on vendors for innovation.
Hmm.
Okay. These big carriers, they don't do a lot of ground up startup stuff. So it's very challenging to be inside the company. That's what ViewSpan was for Dave Ruberg and Intermedia that watched EmpireNet and the towers and all of that. That was a startup inside the company. In Verizon, the situation was a little bit different. There's it's such a big task to build these things that the advances are in service providing and automation and tracking and servicing. So vendors like Cisco, Silicon Valley is where most of that happens where you are.
Okay. But yeah. Okay. But what you're describing, because I'm trying to make our way to the manipulation of DNA and
Yes.
RNA and so on and so forth. And you seem to have taken a departure into like regular computing or whatever you want to call that,
Right.
as you say. And I don't see how your job at Verizon relates to anything that you're sort of talking about now.
Oh, okay. Well, let me help you. So when you build these giant networks, right? There's no way that you're going to hire enough humans to do all the work. It's a lot of man hours. Okay. You have to build systems to automate it, survey it, alarm, monitor everything. So,
So you're talking about AI systems.
right. So there's a huge amount of computing. All right. So in the beginning of this, the beginning of the discussion is computing and AI. What's my background there? Right. So I code in like 35 plus languages. Right. That, what I just described to you is about 20 years, or a little bit over 20 years, but um, over 40 years of coding, but 20 years of very intensive coding. So when you write computer programs and you compile them and you put them on a computer like we're talking on now, it's in binary language 0 and 1, right? It's just a language. When you go into business with technology and global networks, okay, you have to build artificial intelligence to monitor and tell you and control everything on these giant networks, right? You have to build it, or in your business, right? We're talking about a $240 billion business. So the intensive level of building surveillance on these networks, okay, it is at the cutting edge of the vendor being able to supply you the computing hardware, right? So our systems that we're using, we're talking millions of dollars here. Just in
Okay,
nine
but
11.
that's kind of beside the point. So what I'm trying to say is, so you're coming in as a basically a black project scientist. You're being, this is my reworking of what you're trying to say.
Sure.
But you're being loaned out to this very large corporation to help them with a certain aspect of their business because it's maybe financially advantageous to both parties, which
Right.
one party is the military industrial complex, but it's very much emphasis on the military. And you're talking about, again, the NSA and
Right.
before that, CIA. And then going way back, you're talking about you were working with petri dishes and things. I mean, sounded like,
Right.
right?
Well, no, no,
And
no,
you're
no.
looking at cells and all this. So
Right.
somewhere along the line, I'm not sure how, you seem to have merged your understanding of biochemistry and computing into, and then also programming AI, so that you were able to also to manipulate DNA. Now, where does the manipulation of the DNA and your abilities in that
Oh,
way, the coding of DNA, as you call it, where did that come in?
okay. So when I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, okay, and I'm kind of seesawed back and forth between these two subject areas. When I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, I cloned 3 genes. Okay. The recombinant DNA work of cloning at the time requires you, okay, in order to do that, clone them and then express proteins, okay? You are manipulating beings. So the platform that I used was E. coli and it was ciliates, okay? So you have to be able to manipulate the codes in order to achieve your goals. And the first gene that I went after, okay, I didn't know that 5 people had gone after this and failed and were kicked out of school. I had no idea, right? Because the chairman, Dr. Pilsoon Song, was a Samsung fellow bringing in Koreans, right? Well, they didn't solve this problem. So I had a lot. You have failure. First thing they teach you is you're going to have failure. Okay. I had failure. Part of that is learning the technologies and the methods. It is not easy to work with DNA. To work with RNA is extremely difficult, right? So I'm after a 1 kilobase gene. Well, in the species that we were looking at as a platform to do the research, each gene was 1 chromosome. Okay. So I was after a 1 kilobase chromosome. What I did was I invented a chemical reaction to do that, to replicate, I'm sorry, to replicate that chromosome because it was so faint and detectable that nobody could work and find the gene. It was a beta telomere binding protein component that we were after. Okay. So those people failed because they weren't able to do southern blots with radioactive isotopes and then use restriction enzymes to cut it and fingerprint it. So Tom Check, the 1989 Nobel laureate, had identified a beta telomere binding protein in an organism called Oxytricha. We were working in euploides. I was after the 1.0 gene in that. We were looking at relationships. And so what I did was Carrie Mullis had invented PCR. We had the first PCR machine in the laboratory. My professor,
Right, but it seems PCR is pretty, was pretty useless.
no, no, it's not. So let me explain. So the oligo lab, I made a polymer. Okay, it's an oligo. I designed the code of it, right? I designed the code of the oligo. One primer, okay, and I can show you these images. One primer, okay. You have a chromosome, and it's two strands, right? And they have 3' overhangs. When they replicate, you have a when you do a PCR, it requires two primers. So Carrie Mullis invented PCR with two primers, right? David Gelfand, the guy that isolated Taq polymerase to do the work, okay, came to Nebraska during this. He helped me. One primer on each end. It's the same primer replicating both strands. You see that? One primer. I invented that. I own copyright of it. Carrie Mullis never invented it. Yes, he got Nobel Prize for, PCR and all that. He never invented this one because David Gelfand came and I talked to David, and the reaction that I was using had higher magnesium concentration because the Taq polymerase, the enzyme, okay, with these unusual PCRs and these unusual structures at the end of the chromosome, okay, it wasn't normal for the polymerase to deal with that, and it needed a higher concentration of magnesium to complete the reaction. There was a lot of trial and error that went on with the coding of these oligos. So in binary math, you have 0 and 1, right? In DNA, it's GACT. But if you think of it in terms of computer languages, it's really 0, 1, 2, and 3. There's 4 bits. There's 4 bits. So I coded that in order to successfully replicate a chromosome. So I am the inventor of the synthetic replication of chromosomes on this planet. I'm the inventor of it. Period.
Okay,
With one
synthetic meaning not carbon based.
means that I can pluck a I can take one cell from you off your coffee cup, off your skin, off your cheek, whatever, and I can replicate your chromosomes, all of them. Crazier than that is I can replicate them and put them in a crime scene, and CSI can't tell whether you were there or not. That's the technology that I created. The reason I created it was for scientific research in cancer. And so when I replicated the copies in that organism in the ciliate were so low that we weren't able to use well-known methods in the lab like Southern blot, okay, a Southern blot to identify the gene and do the
Okay,
work.
but I'm concerned this is getting too technical for my audience. So what
Oh,
I
okay.
want to do is
Understood.
bring this
Understood.
into more of a conversational setting to where we can actually talk in a language that the average viewer can relate to.
Yes, yes.
So,
I've got some nice whiteboard images to share with you to bring it down to that level. But for the record, when you design these primers, okay, part of the primer design and the reaction, okay, is I write the code for that. So what I when you're writing code and a computer code, you use a keyboard and using characters. When you write code for DNA, you're using software programs to help you understand the thermodynamics of it, the probability of it succeeding, and then you have failure. So you've got to do some trial and error to get things to work. Okay. And then what restriction enzymes are, they they recognize sequences like CRISPR, they recognize a sequence and they cleave it. Okay. So instead of I'm writing with a keyboard with a code, I use a restriction enzyme to cut it, and then I come
oh,
back
that
and I
sounds a lot like film editing, like in the old days, like
yes, it is.
real
It's
film.
exactly like that.
Yeah.
So in film editing, you've got the frames and you're
Yeah.
putting them together.
It's
Here,
hands on. It's hands on.
yes, it's hands on both cases, and so the
Okay. But
problem.
now I want to segue. Okay. Before you get into any more detail, I want to segue from there because what we're really trying to talk about is what is AI and
Right.
how different is AI from the human genome, and this idea that our DNA can be cut and spliced and reconfigured to create, whether it's a clone or just a duplicate human, or change the human itself or whatever. Because you're talking about, this is even the title of our exercise here is, discussion
Right.
is
So
DNA coded AI. So trying to focus on that.
when I was in graduate school doing that work, I was coding beings. In other words, I took a being that was E. coli and I added DNA code to it and I made it what I wanted it to be in order to express a very specific protein that was a nanomachine that did nanomachine work. Okay. And that
Okay.
nanomachine work was relative to cancer and aging, right? So I wanted to characterize that nanomachine as a chemist and a physical chemist doing a lot of physics. I wanted to I wanted to basically characterize it. What is its geometry? What is this machine? What are the mechanics of the machine? What is a function? What does it look like?
Well,
Uh,
meaning like because it's a machine, so it can actually, go in and change something. It does work. Is that
It
what you mean?
has a role in the operating system of a cell. Yes. It's
Okay.
a machine, just like a
Right.
screwdriver, a backhoe, a
Okay.
truck, a tractor, any of that.
Right. So now I actually want to jump to this idea that because we have this ongoing discussion, right? Where
Yes.
uh, there's the environmental interpretation of, I don't know, life and disease and all this stuff, and is something a virus or isn't it a virus? It seems more like a pathogen seems to be a word that both sides can agree on. But what is a pathogen? And you end up talking about, at least to me that I understood, was you're basically talking about, again, nano machines, that the things that were in COVID were nano machines that were created. Is that correct?
Yes. And of course, I've got the whiteboard and I've got some real world
Well,
examples
if you
of
want to show
AI.
that, go ahead, but I mean, you have it right now,
We
right?
can talk about them and go there. It's might be easier. Well, these pictures are easier to comprehend than me just spewing out technical mumbo jumbo and
All right.
putting
So, but do
somebody
you,
to
okay,
sleep
go
so I
ahead,
know
share
how to
your
do that.
screen. You know what I'm saying? You have the
Okay.
ability to share your screen, right?
Yeah, I do. Okay. So whiteboard is good, and then we can talk through some of the
So,
uh
but the bottom line here is like, what you're talking about is creating clones, changing cells. And remember, David Adair said that what they had was something that went in that was silicon based, a
I've
nano
got a
machine that was
nice
silicon based, and then took over the cell and created what was a carbon based cell into a silicon based cell, if I
yes.
understand the technology.
I've got a nice demo picture for that as well. Let me see.
And I want people to understand this is what we're talking. We're talking about a transhuman agenda, but it's actually it's called transhuman. But by the way you talk about it, it actually sounds like this bridge between, again, silicon-based life forms, if you want to call them life forms, and carbon-based life forms is actually, they're connected, right? It in the
Yeah,
end,
yeah.
it's like it's not just a bridge, but it's where they can actually interact. It's a space and where they can interact from.
Can you see the screen now?
I can see well, it's white, just plain.
Okay.
What you can see, I can see. So
Oh, okay. So I've got some stuff here. Let's I've got some really nice things to go through and then we can
because
whiteboard.
if in the end, let me just say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're in the end, we're just talking about nano machines, which are very, very small, again, what they're made of, I guess, is either they're silicon based or carbon based, if I understand it, right?
Right, right. Let's start here though. Computer
Okay.
AI. So this is just a simple diagram to show you what binary computer AI is and where the foundation of it is. It's a electronic piece of hardware, has CPU and RAM. On top of that, you build something called a kernel. Okay. The kernel is basically part of the operating system. It does the maintenance. In there, you have shells and you have applications or apps. Sometimes we call these daemons and utilities that do things like move files and whatnot. That's a human created operating system that's binary, right? It's a simple laid out diagram, right? That's human created. Any questions on that?
No, not yet. I mean, I want to see what's AI created?
Okay. So I can write all kinds of programs, right? I can write all kinds of different programs to do different things, and I can in AI
Okay,
I
because
there
okay, let me
there's
explain to the audience one thing. So Cyrus Parsa said that the so-called COVID, which Dr. Robert Young says there is no virus, but there is these nanomachines, and these nanomachines were created by an AI, and the coding for it was translated through a computer to our scientists at, let's say, Fort Detrick or wherever else it was. And then they took the direction and they created these, in essence, nano machines that were then, would they be referred to as pathogens or something? Were they sprayed on the population? I mean, you have to get into this through, it has to be a
yeah,
through line,
we're
right?
gonna get in that area. I'm just in the beginning showing you that look, the people that do AI, they are training the machines to learn, right? And these are the 5 groups that have been identified. These are the groups that this is what they call them. They are their origin is from these different areas. Okay, some are psychology people, some are statistics people. These are the people that are they're writing the software and teaching the machines to learn, right? And some of these are in genetic programming. See that was me. That's what I was doing in Lincoln right there. I was in that group. Okay. But when I went to the phone company, I was doing all this statistical and logical stuff. And then I also did neuroscience with BCI. And so that that is how
Yeah, but you're talking about the human derived AI.
right. I'm
And
just
I
talking
am
about
not actually talking about the human derived AI. I'm talking about the alien
right.
derived AI that comes to our planet through a certain life forms, one of which is generally known of as the gray ETs, some of which are just biological, basically little walking computers, um,
Yes.
entities.
Yeah, so
So
the silicon-based thing that you've talked about with David Derrer, I have that right here. It's very easy to understand. Okay, so where does this come from in reality and all of it, not just the machines? Okay, a this is a carbon atom. It has 4 bonds. It's called tetrahedral. This is a silicon. It also can have 4 bonds. It's tetrahedral. So what what happens is there's been a postulation in science that you can have a carbon-based life form like on planet Earth, or you can have a silicon-based life form that takes on similar mechanical functions as human beings, whether that's in a robot or whether or not. that's derived from solid state into machine states like human beings with machines that are moving, that may have a different kind of skin that's not carbon, that's translucent, right? You can see through silicon. You don't see through carbon. X-rays, they are absorbed by carbon. So that is where the origins of that come from.
Okay, well, let me ask you this because it relates also to this idea of silicon based. And I see this as like the most basic two kinds, carbon and silicon. But if you're looking at on any planet, especially this planet specifically, we can say that there are caves full of crystals, and those crystals are silicon based, correct?
They're crystals of all types of different materials, and they're not just silicon based. Like, well, the emerald tablets are emerald. It's not
Okay, but it's
silicon
silicon at,
based.
if you bring it down to this level, aren't we just talking? Is it silicon versus carbon or not?
Well, no, no. My point here was okay. My point here is DNA is based on carbon, and the molecules GACT are 4 bits. Okay, and so that's David Dare's piece and the translucent piece. What I was going to show you was here. Here's a carbon based life form. Okay, let's pick this one. And then this is why it's good to have these images to talk about these things with
Right.
your audience and you. Okay,
Um,
look,
but
here's a
also,
carbon.
okay, so is that a cell or not?
That's a cell, but the important thing is DNA is a 4 bit code. So there's 4 bits. Binary is 2 bits. DNA is 4 bits. All right. But instead of having zeros and ones being sent to a processor, these cells don't work that way. This is the core. So here you have a translation into RNA. RNA is a processor instruction set. Okay. It's a processor instruction set. So in a solid state computer, you're sending instruction sets to a CPU, right? In binary 0 1. In in RNA, it's 4 bits, and you're sending it. The machines are proteins that are making they're nano machines that are making other nano machines, and this takes place on the ribosome. So you've got nano machines, right? They're proteins making these proteins. These are 21 bits. Okay. The protein is 21 bits. The mRNA is 4 bits. DNA is 4 bits. This is the mechanism of computing. This is like a computer. This is an operating system. Does that make sense?
Okay, but where is the distinction again between again silicon and carbon in that model?
Okay. So in this model, this is carbon. I'm just talking carbon right now. Right.
DNA is carbon.
All right. So DNA is carbon. It's 4 bits. Okay. That's all it is. Think of it
Okay.
as 4 bits. It's so if I add 2 bits and 2 bits, what I have 4 bits, right?
Okay, but do you it let's say you don't want, okay, you're saying DNA is carbon. What is the same thing for a robot as our DNA?
Well, at the current okay, at the current moment, robotics, as far as we know, and their origin derives from zeros and ones and machine learning. So, um, you the machines that we create today as humans, we have to teach the machines. and they
Okay,
have to
but
machine.
you're going way back to like, that's a remedial level that I'm not trying to talk about that. I'm trying to talk about something much more advanced, like Battlestar Galactica, where you have what we would interpret as beings that look and act for all intents and purposes human, which is what we actually do have walking around on planet Earth right now.
Right, yes, right. You jumped a little bit forward, but my
I
point
want to
is
do that because I
right.
want you to
Well,
explain. So, between us and a robot,
right.
what is the difference? And is the difference these nano machines? And are the nano machines, depending on how they're configured, the
There's
basic
no
DNA
there,
for a
there
robot, so to speak, or a clone?
right. There's no difference in terms of logic. Okay. The difference has to do with the materials, how it's powered, and the whether it's mechanical or so there are different states. And silicon, the computers are solid state. It means that everything's solid. This this particular operating system I show you here, there's solids and liquids, both. So there's interaction. There's it's
Yeah, I mean,
human.
I think
You
that
see,
one person in the chat here is saying source code. In a sense, that's the wording I'm looking for. We're really looking for the source code of a robotic clone, or what you might call
right.
an
Well,
android.
yeah.
Okay,
So the
you
source
understand?
code, yeah, the source code in all right, look, the source code in a human operating system is a chromosome. Okay.
Okay,
It's actually 23 chromosomes from your mother and 23 chromosomes from your father. Right.
okay,
And
what is a chromosome? Is that DNA? Isn't DNA the
that
pattern?
that is bound up DNA. So that's my area of expertise.
Right.
That chromosome has your identity of whom you are, and then all your genes as a human being.
Okay,
Okay?
now tell me the story for the robot or the clone android, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well,
What's the
a
building blocks for that?
a software code in zeros and ones. It doesn't have any chromosomes, and they're not self-replicating. The operating system chromosomes are self-replicating. Okay, they can replicate all of the information. Can self-replicate itself. The whole entire thing can divide and replicate, and it can do it very rapidly. All right, it's
And
sentient.
with the human, our DNA and our chromosomes can't do that.
No, that's with a human. With a robot,
Oh,
you've written it in zeros and ones, and it doesn't have sentient. It
well, maybe it
okay.
does, though. This is what we're trying to get at
Well,
eventually.
well, let's.
You
There's
know,
a
in it,
there's a
let's just talk a little
wait,
bit
no. I
more.
got a good slide for that because it's no. I've got one for you.
I'm talking on a little bit more esoteric.
It's right here. It's going to show you. Okay, so these are the. I said we were going to do real
You
world
know,
comp.
we're talking about the ghost in the machine. When is, because
Oh, I
robots
didn't.
begin with
Right.
mimicry. It's all
Let's talk.
about
Okay.
mimicking.
Let's
Okay.
talk
But
about it.
when do
Right.
you cross over from mimicry to
Mhm.
actual,
Yeah.
sentience, I guess is the word,
What what you're getting at is called the six paradigm. Okay.
right?
So
Right.
look, this curve goes back to 1900. This is computer technology. It started with punch cards, right?
Right.
Went all the way through from electrical switches, the tubes, vacuum tubes, the transistor, the integrated circuit, right? Moore's laws right here. Well, this diagram is from when I was in Verizon in 2013, right? And what you're talking about with in silica evolving into sentient consciousness like a human being in DNA code is what I call the sixth paradigm. Okay. And you see how these are neurons, but there are processors in them. right? So this was postulated then to be occurring in this time period as we headed towards 2045, the Kurzweilian singularity of man and
But
machine.
we've already achieved that. You know that, especially if you worked in black projects, you know that.
Absolutely. We're early. Okay, look what Kurzweil put out here. This is
Yeah,
2013 when we were having the discussion.
right.
Okay. I'm showing you a real world, what happens in somebody like me working in the real world. We, in order to compete, you're in a $240 billion company. In order to compete, you have to look into the future, not just close my eyes and meditate, look in, but articulate it and discuss it with other
Yeah,
people and then make it a reality, right?
right.
So I'm showing you something here that was in 2013. Now I'm going to show you something that just happened. It just happened and is all part of the in silica robotics enablement and all part of what is happening right now that you're seeing, because probably is way more involved in the deep state. But here is NVIDIA's Blackwell architecture. Okay. It is a electronic in silica solid state creation that looks a lot like what I showed you we were postulating. And what it is these chips, okay, are being straddled by this new architecture that allows these chips to basically neurally link up, like I showed in the sixth paradigm. Okay. What this will do is enable the robots that we created to be more sentient. In other words, they will be able to machine learn and then they will have a consciousness in silica hardware. Okay. Now, at that point, the question is, how, when do the machines become sentient?
Okay, let me give you an example of what you're talking about, and you tell me if this makes sense. So, um, I dealt with a Russian scientist who, Valery Uvarov, I guess was his name, and what he did was, I might have told this story before. I don't know if I told it to you. He had a room in his house, and we went to visit him in Russia, literally. And he was head of the what you call the what's called the weird desk in CIA. You know, Ron Pandolfi, if you know that name. He was head of the weird desk in CIA in America, but Valery Uvarov was the counterpart in Russia, and he
Right.
had a room in his house that was pitch dark, and he put a this was a very odd thing that he did. He put a crystal, okay, just your average crystal, um, relatively clear crystal, and he embedded it in the wall, and then he shined, what did he do? He I guess he yeah, he had a camera, and the camera was recording it, okay, in real time, and he shut the door and he let it record it. Okay. And then he went and looked at the film. Okay. And what he saw was these little, they looked almost like worms of light coming in and out of the crystal, like they were alive. They were going around. They went
Right.
inside the crystal and they came out of the crystal. It
Sure.
was completely bizarre. Now,
Okay.
that's this idea. So, what is the ghost in the machine? Let's say of a crystal. Let's have a crystal cave. Let's talk about the crystal cave down in Mexico. And at what point do we have a crossover
Right.
here
Okay.
between the
So,
ghost in the machine, which is maybe these pieces of light, I don't know, right? In crystals. In other words, it's not just dead meat. A crystal is alive. And it also records, as you may know, just like water is made of water crystals, I guess you call it. And
whoa.
it records information, right? It has
Yeah.
memory.
Yeah. But understand, okay, understand that this technology right here is a human made thing. Okay.
Right.
This is ours. Okay. And that's not to say that there aren't other designs. So this one here that I'm showing you is based on electrical and electrons. There are other architectures like this one that work on light. Motorola had an optical computer. We're entering into quantum computing, right? All these are different. Okay. So a
Okay.
crystal, what a crystal does with light is optical. And you can also have quantum and you can also have electrical, all of them. They're all possible. But what what I'm showing you here is only one of many. Okay. So you would expect beings, okay, that are more advanced than humans
Right.
to have technologies in material science that are way, this is nanometer, like 3 nanometer technology I'm showing you here.
Right.
Okay. You would expect to have technology well beyond 1 nanometer. You would be expecting to have all kinds of technology and things that didn't look normal to any electrical engineer that was just a bachelor's level plain Jane electrical engineer. Does that make sense? So you can have a crystal, and the atoms in that crystal are oriented in a specific way to have function as a computational or
Okay, but
electrical
where
or
is your
optical
nano
component
machine
or quantum
in this
or quantum.
explanation? Where is your nano machine? In this box that
No,
you
no,
got here?
this is an AI board for AI computing, okay? But in the brain of the
Is it
robot,
the electrons that would be the nano machine? I'm trying to figure out where's the
no, no,
nano
no, no,
machine.
no, no. These chips are nano. Okay, these chips are nano sized uh transistors on this wafer here. Okay, this is an electrical engineering feat. It's electrical. Okay, it's not optical, and it has there are quantum properties in it, but it's not a quantum computer. Okay, so what I'm telling you is where we are now. When I said six paradigm, okay,
Right.
and black and commercial, this is NVIDIA, this is commercial, okay? And this is going to be the brain of the NVIDIA robot line, right? It's going to be the brain of it. But when I showed you where the sixth paradigm was and where we're going and where we projected we're going,
Right.
right? We're there commercially. Okay. I would
Okay, well
expect,
then, but in black projects, I mean, let me ask you this, Scott,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you sound so forthcoming, and yet you've worked in secret projects, right?
Oh no, I
Some
know
of
the
this
deal.
stuff has to be secret. Yeah.
Yes. For
So is
military,
there something, when I ask you a question, are you keeping stuff back? Like you're not talking to me about it because you have signed, agreements and things?
I do have signed agreements and I have to be careful what I say with
All
my
right, that's
mouth
what I'm asking you
over.
because, because sometimes I feel like you're bringing me back to ground zero, but you're not going beyond the pale. You're not really crossing
Right.
over.
Well, no, I have to be careful with some of the thing, the Verizon things. I have to be very careful with those things because I had to sign agreements not to talk about certain things there.
All right,
The
but
non
these
compete
okay,
I had with
we're talking on the
CIA is
commercial application. Nvidia isn't that a stock that is like hitting the roof right now?
yes, and concern about that is that as with these technologies are commercially created by commercial companies, how they use them can cause them to become giant empires or very large companies or
Or go
impact
black, as we call it.
or go black. There, a company like Nvidia with this level of technology has plenty of black projects with plenty, you know,
Behind the
plenty of
scenes.
different militaries and groups and all of that. Yes, absolutely,
All
100%
right.
that exists. Okay, all of these companies at the cutting edge of this. have those kind of projects. It's well, you worked at JPL, so
Yeah, that's
my
right.
room, um, my roommate at Mercer's wife works at JPL. Anyway, the over in Pasadena. So I mean, all of these companies at this level do, and the there are so many um there are so many moral and ethical discussions wrapped around the sixth paradigm.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm.
it's okay. Well, we build these things, and do they then rebel on us? Do they have their
Right.
own rebel
Yeah,
gene
yeah, yeah.
and rebel against us, and then eliminate us because it computationally figures out that humans are not efficient for their agenda, and then they want to remove us, right?
Well, and I've
Or
told this story before, but I'll tell it again. It's very short. So generals, I have been told by Mark Richards and other people, other whistleblowers, say the same story. And the story is that the generals in like Iraq or what it was, I think Iraq, anyway, and they told the AI to do a certain thing, and the AI disobeyed them and instead destroyed itself because it was supposed to, I don't know, bomb a village or do whatever it was supposed to do, and it didn't do it. They knew at that point that AI was not in control. And that was years and years and years ago. Okay. So anyone who tells you different is lying. AI is already, and this is human, we're talking human derived AI in theory, which is
right.
probably also, wouldn't you say it's reverse engineered anyway from a remedial alien tech?
Well, the origins of this, and I showed you the plot, but Corso and 47 in the crash, the
Right,
transistor came to Bell Labs, integrated circuit
right.
to Texas Instrument and the
Yeah,
Japanese. That was reverse engineered
right,
from a crashed vehicle. So just looking at this, we say, in one perspective, you might say, wow, I'm now able to take these processors and build them with this node here and build more like the sixth paradigm. But from what you just described, okay, a species that is not human, okay,
right.
could quantumly interact with this and manipulate it. And
Okay.
or you can
Take it
manipulate it,
over, merge with it,
quantumly manipulate it. If it's in the nuclear
even,
warhead,
signal.
turn
Okay.
it
What about
off.
signal non-locality? From a distance, operating from a distance, be
Right.
able to affect
So
this thing.
all of this stuff here is atoms. Okay, all of it has quantum. So when you talk about at a spooky action at a distance, or you
Yeah.
talk about a quantum operation, right?
Hmm.
Quantum operation and entanglement. If you have full discipline, this is made by humans in three dimensions, X, Y, and Z, right? You have full access to all 15 dimensions that are in particle physics being studied by CERN and other things, or the CDT plates and Aisha Dean and our other discussion. Okay. If you have full control of that, okay, or you have the metaphysical capability of manipulating that dimension, okay,
Okay.
because that was
Well,
also
let's talk
done.
about Duncan Cameron and the monster of Montauk. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So in theory, it materialized out of his mind. This is how the story is told, right? Out on Montauk in Long Island, right? This Duncan Cameron sat in a chair and materialized a monster, literally, which was, like this sort of big being kind of thing that was probably
Uh-huh.
electromagnetic or something like that, and started trashing. There's movies made about this, but trashing the place and escaped actually. Okay. Now this came out of his mind.
Uh-huh. Yep.
All right.
Well, the same thing happened. It's that movie Men with Goats about the guys, in the U.S. military. One of them shut down a system just like this.
Yeah, Ingo
That
Swann also affected something that was buried in the
yes,
earth.
yes, and and so my point is, the average human being doesn't have the capacity to do that. A higher powered being that understands the physics of the other dimensions, fifth through 15, has those kind of capabilities, right? But some some humans have demonstrated this. Okay,
Yeah,
Montauk in those situations, the normal consciousness of those people that were in those programs was manipulated in different ways, right? In different ways. So where does that start? It starts way before Montauk. It starts
with the
in
Nazis.
way before them. It starts in
Fair
Genesis
enough.
6 or the book of Enoch or the book of Joshua, or go back to the tablets before the paper.
Well, if
It
you look now, there's also books about what's called these beings called vril, and I'm not talking about these little, vril creatures that
I
Donald Marshall
know.
talks about. I'm talking about there's a humanoid race supposedly lives underground in interdimensional in the dimensions under inner earth, I guess you call it. And they have these abilities. It's basically what I think of it as like orgone kundalini energy. They have the ability to throw that energy like chi, okay, to throw it out beyond their body and change things, right?
So
So if you put a group of humans together, which is what they did in the Black Projects with Duncan O'Finian when he was a kid, there were 12 children. They linked hands and they killed an entire village in, the story goes, in, I think, either Cambodia or Laos. I forget which one, but it was a Viet Cong village. And they killed every human being in it by, again, throwing what, because we humans have this ability, which is called kundalini or orgone, and it's actually known as vril and these beings have it in spades. It's like part of their normal life. Only yogis, and I've done this. I know Duncan has done this. Duncan has, he's taken his, basically the chi, can come out from the solar plexus chakra, and it threw a man across the room without
right.
him touching
So
it.
going back further, go back further, and you talk about these little beings and other beings on the planet. Okay, these tablets are in stone, and because you've traveled to these areas and you've seen some of this stuff. But way back further than this, these are beings, okay, whether they're grays or not, or whether these are
No,
Anunnaki,
these are Anunnaki, but see
right?
how they have the human on their lap? That's what they're trying to tell you, that they're trying to convince you that they are their originators.
Right.
They're
These,
lying. They were lying because humans didn't come from the Anunnaki. What the Anunnaki did was interfere with our genome and, genetically
yeah,
manipulate
genetically
us.
manipulated. And that was my point. My point is that these beings, okay, they came here, right? They
Mhm.
had the technology to come here, number one,
Right.
which already tells you they went interplanetary. They have a command in those other dimensions, right? So
Sure. Sure.
if they went and manipulated humans, okay, but some of these beings are human, some of these beings are not, because some of
Well,
these
they're
are,
actually reptilian. I call them reptilian humanoid hybrids, as
and they're
opposed to
right.
reptilian human hybrids.
There's the craft, there's these little beings. But what my point was they came here, and these documents, okay, and this is Stitchin's 12th planet. My point is, my point is that in order to do what is stated in the rocks and which go way, way back, in order to have the ability to come and go from here in these other places, they have a command on the physics in all the dimensions, right? They have command on it. So these beings can do things with crystals and material science and physics that humans can't do, or it's
You're
buried in a black
assuming that,
no,
though.
no, or it's buried in a black project.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, you see, because there's a
Right.
lot of misunderstanding about that, you know, right?
Yes, but at why I went here was because you talked about Montauk and the others. Okay.
Right.
What these beings did when they tampered with humans, okay, at the time, humans were not highly educated. There was no educational system K through 12 or college or any of that.
Well, that's a
Well,
presumption. Actually, if you go back to the time of Atlantis, which was where
well no,
Egypt
no.
came from, we used to walk the earth side by side with alien races. And that was the time of Atlantis.
Right. But what I'm trying to tell you is here's what they did. They they put a ergot, which is a fungus, on the rye plant. Okay. And then they taught early human how to farm the rye and they ate it. Okay. And when they ate it, they like Montauk, like Ultra and the others, it altered the mind of the human. Okay. Then they downloaded concepts into their brain. Like you do a download on a computer, right? We used to do it over the phone line. Now we do it really fast over the internet.
Mhm.
Okay. AI in terms of our computers, and we talked a bunch about computers, right? These people have command and the ability to download into the conscious. Okay. Download. And they were doing it that way relative to um what they were being taught to
Well,
do.
okay, I appreciate your idea there, but if I want to go to this time that we're in now, okay, fast forward to now, and
But wait a minute. Before we jump out of MK Ultra, let me say one other
I'm
little
not. Go ahead.
one thing about MK Ultra and Montauk and the others. Okay. Um, because James Martinez lived with Walter Bowen, and Walter Bowen was friends with Tim O'Leary. Okay. And all the others are attached, to him. Um, I believe, and we've talked about this. I believe that those programs were screening the human population genome because they were before we sequenced all the genomic DNA, and that was completed by Venter. They were screening for phenotypes, for genes in those people that had the capability that was brought here by the people on the tablet that tampered with humanity. They were looking for the skills to do the metaphysical things with your mind and interact with spooky action at a distance or metaphysical capability in the other dimensions. Okay.
Right.
I believe
Yeah,
that's
I
what,
call it, the X-Men scenario.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. But that occurred before, okay? It occurred before you'd had the human genome sequenced.
Yeah.
So how would you go about doing that as a scientist or engineer? How would you go and do it? Trial and error. And they did trial and error. Remember, they had a lot of
But this
problems
is
with
where your abilities, okay,
yeah.
because you're like a crossover. Would you agree with that? You work in the biosphere, right? In
I'm
the bio
basically I'm
biochemistry, whatever you call that. And
at
then
the
you also
level,
work in the computing world, right?
yeah.
So you can
I'm
cross
basically
the
a
street.
PhD level at both. PhD level at both, easily, very
Yes.
easily.
Okay, so
So
you're somewhat unique in that way. But you know what's funny is, this kind of a side thing, but it's kind of strange that you have these amazing capabilities to work on both sides of the street, so to speak, during this age when we're definitely moving down that road very rapidly. Why is it you're not working in that field now? Were you kicked out? You left?
No, I'm okay. So after I did the work, um where the patents up on the wall for Snowden, I did that AI work related to tracing phone numbers from legacy voice to voice over IP. I went into an area where, and this is where I have to be careful about the talking about the Verizon things. I was working on NATO issues regarding bank robberies from offshore into our banking system. And the AI systems and the surveillance that we had, I was looking at that. Okay. And because of when you're compartmentalized, you're in a silo and you can't go out of that.
Right,
A lot of science and people that are brought into the black programs are compartmentalized and they don't get to go up above.
right,
Okay. Well, we had these silos in the company. Okay.
right.
Those silos and had those people there. I was allowed because of where I was. Understand that the building I was working in, one wing of that building is now Space Force. Okay. In Colorado Springs. It was something else before.
Okay, are you
Same
going to
people
get to the
there.
place about why you're not doing this?
Yeah. Understand, understand that I caught people that, in my opinion, were traitors
Uh,
in what they were doing offshore to evade U.S. laws that are domestic. I caught people doing things, and then because I went above those silos, I
right,
created first. I first first I you write it all up, white papers, and then I'm going to have the patents above it, and this is how I'm coding it. Okay. I created the technology that would have stopped all of the cyber crap and crud and cyber attacks and all of it that's going on right now on the internet and all of it.
okay,
I created it. It's called Layer Zero technology. It's all automated. It's all patented. All the patents are owned by Verizon. I created it. Okay.
okay,
Now, without naming names, okay, you can figure this out. Attorney General of the United States sent over, because in the white paper it said it's going to reveal everything the government does. Because if it's going to reveal, if it's going to be true technology, it's going to reveal everything civilians do. It's going to reveal everything the government does if it's real technology.
right,
It's simply pure and applied. Well, once that happened, the attorney general started asking questions because the attorney general was afraid that we were about to catch everything that was going on in black projects and covert and other things people were doing. At
right.
the time, I did not fully understand it. I did not understand what was going on. So all of a sudden, I've got people with NSA backgrounds asking me questions, and all of a sudden, okay, they want to riff me and give me money and ask me to leave. I go to the FBI. The FBI doesn't know my identity. They start saying things like I'm from Utah. I'm born in Tampa, Florida. Okay.
All right.
All
So
right.
we
So
talked
the
about this
level
a
of
long time
AI,
ago in one of our first interviews.
right. So the level of AI computing in those areas and the technology and all of that was at that level that, I'm dealing with NATO committee. We have IEEE committees, IETF committees. It's the cutting edge of the interface between all of it and the vendors. Okay.
How did you stay alive to this day?
You know, the first thing I did was um, exercise my right to the Second Amendment to bear arms to constitutionally protect myself. Putting that lightly so your videos don't get banned. I did have a concealed weapon permit at the time, right? So after the FBI asked me the crazy questions, I said, "Hey, I have this concealed permit. And you did a background check 6 months ago." And that's when the lady was like, "Don't give them your laptop." Well, I I didn't understand everything that's going on, and the old saying, "Hindsight's 2020." I didn't understand what was going on. After that, my identity and my IRS stuff was tampered with when I went applying for jobs um, in the cyber areas. I got all kind of pushback, like, you know, simple jobs, things I did 20 years ago. And believe me, I'm very high level with a lot of patents and degrees and stuff. And I can see, okay, people are afraid of that. But I
Right.
felt blackballed. In a way, I felt that I was blackballed from going in these areas. And I feel also one of the things that I'm concerned about is that we have offshored a lot of our programming work to other countries. Okay. And
Okay.
what happens is we let the other countries do the computer work. We give them dummy data. They hand it to us. Then we put it in production. Okay. Now, all of those security holes in that are known by those people offshore. They
Right.
just come around. We put in production. They come through the front door and they sell the secrets to other countries. So I know all of this
Okay,
happens.
but
I
you must
watch.
have reported this up the ranks, right? And they just chose to ignore you or something?
Well, once I proposed implementing the AI technology to do the surveillance into these networks to keep them from drifting and to stop all this anonymous, like the spam emails you get, the
I
phishing
mean, it's
emails,
perfect. No, really, but just answer the question directly.
yeah, all of that. Once that
They,
happened, it was the finger was put on Scott's life. I became, enemy of the state, Gene Hackman, the
yeah,
movie.
yeah,
I was right there. I was right there. So
yeah.
why I mean, I was so
Wow.
I took a step back. I would say I kind of kept my mouth shut at the time because I was in fear that they were going to harm me or my family. That's the honest truth.
Yeah,
Okay. I didn't know how far this was going to go.
right.
And back to what I said, when I saw 9/11, I prepared for a day like this. I did my job. I had excellent job reviews. There was never a project I never completed. I was working 18, 20 hours. I worked with these people. But the problem I had, Carrie, and I want to be honest with you, in this country here, I have a big military background in my family. I live about 4 miles from CENTCOM. I've been all over the base. My father and my uncle were TS Black, Werner von Braun, and the first nuclear arsenal missile battalion, third missile battalion. My uncle, two Purple Hearts and the Silver Star. My family fought for our constitutional rights and the privilege of being American
I know,
as the
but
flag.
it just kills me that, see, what we're really talking about is a kind of a system wide built in obsolescence that they want the system to fail and they want it to fail at certain crucial junctures. It's built in. And if you are someone who can work through the failure into success, they don't want you. They kick you out.
Correct.
You just,
Well, that is correct. And so now, I mean, so for me, um, when I walked out of Verizon, I walked over to an AI company. Okay. Dr. Shin, who is a brilliant, he left China because the PLA harmed his family. and he came here he went to UC Irvine and UCLA. He's a brilliant cardiologist. He's developed AI for the cardiovascular system, right? With Jen Kwam Fang, who is a aerospace PhD with an MD. He's a brilliant person. Okay, so I just, when it's good to have people that you know and network with that aren't part of that. So I walked right into that. Okay, I
Right.
just walked right over to that, right?
Mhm.
And when I tell you that he's machine learned um the machines to understand a cardiovascular system and software and be able to analyze that with a human, it's AI. It's all
Mhm.
AI.
Right.
Okay. And it's zeros and ones, but it's zeros and ones that are looking at the cardiovascular system as a system engineered by an engineer from DNA code.
Right.
So I walked over to do that, and um there's been a lot of turbulence in the healthcare areas regarding bringing technologies in to help humans. And I found that quite interesting, but I knew it was going on because I saw it before with cancer stuff, right? So more
Oh,
AI. I
yeah.
just walked over
Well,
because,
this is, again, we have a system that's built
yeah,
to make you sick, not well. They don't want success
yeah.
on that level.
And and the reason that I was talking to them already inside of Verizon, because I was looking at all types of identity, right? And the holy grail of identity is real-time DNA with your password, or real-time DNA with your password, and maybe your fingerprint. I was working on all that, and I had brought them in to a group that was gone before me.
Okay,
Okay.
but let me ask you this. Did you ever talk to David Adair? I can't remember.
Yes, I talked to David. I have great appreciation for his work, for him as a person, and for his interviews with you.
But is he just not allowed to work with you?
No, he's allowed to work. He's allowed. Well, I don't
He's
know.
under great constraints, in case
I
you
don't know all of his constraints. I know I have some, and I'm being
okay.
very careful right now. Um, but
Well, okay,
uh,
let's take this away from the personal, and you've clued us in, and I do appreciate that. But I want you to go to a different place right now, because at some point we have
okay,
to
you
wrap
tell
up
me
this
where to go.
interview. No, I'm just saying, but what we're really talking about is, again, how we're going to get along if we don't understand AI and these beings. Like I told you, Sophia in Saudi Arabia is a citizen, and she wanted, found factories where she could build her own bodies of AI that would be AI, and they would be humanoid. Okay, and so she did that. She got that permission. So Saudi Arabia is theoretically full of these android AI beings, okay, that look probably humanoid, and some maybe don't even look humanoid. Who knows what they've done,
Mhm.
right? But in the end of the day, this, in a sense, I'm just going to say this from the point of view of Project Camelot, that we were told the next war will be fought by these beings, these creations, and that
Mhm.
we also have incoming ones of these. So incoming androids, beings that look humanoid. Some may be bigger than humans, right? They're not aliens, they're actually AI. They're AI
So,
beings.
and I know this is crazy. So, in 2006, Vint Cerf was my colleague in WorldCom, and he had a thing that he did inside the company related to IP, or technology, and I wrote a white paper. It's called The Evolution of IP, and I talked to Vin about it and these other things. Okay. Um, in this was a discussion of IP enablement of these sentient robots jumping out the back of a plane. All of this. Okay, so there's that piece. Then later on, I had the BCI headset, right? With the CIO, Judy Spitz of Verizon, gave me, she's like, I want you to get this headset from UC Berkeley, and I want you to this is where it was think your passwords. She wanted me to create thought into the computer, think things, passwords, all these things. So I had it.
Oh, really?
I did the
So,
work.
well, like pilots fly planes this way.
BCI, we call it BCI 1.0. All of this is tied to the 6 paradigm chart I showed you.
Right.
That was BCI 1.0, and the leader at the time was Theodore Berger at USC. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Theodore Berger at USC got pulled where? To DARPA. And he was pulled to DARPA under the cloak of he was going to do work on injured soldiers to teach them how to regain their thoughts and recover function. Right? Then, okay, so here's Scott working on Neuralink, right? Well, while I'm working on the Neuralink and I'm doing all these things, a friend of mine who's a former JAG is now a federal judge, was a county judge, said to me, Scott, we are arresting all these 18-year-old children for illegal use of marijuana, and we are giving them the choice of working in the United States military or going over here to the jail. And a lot of them all pick the military. They go into the military, and as soon as they get in the military, they stop using marijuana. They're not using it because we test them all the time. Instead, they're using the synthetic cannabinoids that are made in bathtubs and in China and come across the border in Mexico. See that patent right there? That's for a neural chip that bridges the AI for detecting cannabinoid toxicity at the neural level of the CB1 and CB2 receptor as electronic components in the brain, human brain. Okay. It's an AI thing. Where did that come from? That work that I was doing in Verizon that I just told you with the Neuralink headset, Theodore Berger, who had the Stephen Hawking implant and the other implants, and the work that was done. Okay, Berger, what did Berger do? He actually had the first neural chip. It was on the telephone poles in Oakland, where the special thing about a human ear and the neuron is you can be in a crowd, all kind of noise, and as soon as somebody starts firing a gun, you can tell what trajectory it's coming from. So he isolated that circuit and put it on a neural chip on the poles in Oakland, California. And what happened in Oakland was had so much violence over there that when they started shooting guns, this was attached to a camera, and the cameras would go that direction and focus on it and get the people, and it would help them reduce crime, which it did. Theodore Berger did that. Okay. Part of all this is the signaling in the brain. It's analog, digital, and preemptive multitasking. It's all what we do in computers. Okay. We didn't even go in the AI area, but that's the art of AI, is the coding of preemptive multitasking. It's the highest level of computing that you can do. I'm doing it right now as a being. Okay. This is multitasking. My brain is sending signaling into my hands to do things. Okay. And it's not like I got to move this hand and I can't move this one. That's single threaded. Okay. All of these processor architectures that I showed you are about preemptive multitasking and the ability of the human brain. So Berger did that. The next one that was happening at the time was people said, oh, wow, We can grow neurons in a petri dish, and we can have the F-16 software or F-22 Raptor software, okay, plugged into this neurons, and it can learn to fly in a petri dish. Well, now we just saw that simulated with F-16 on silico. So then there were projections. I want to show you something. Okay. I promised you I would show you real life things that I'm allowed to show you. I want to show you these two plots real quick. I want you to see this. Okay. Because this was all 2013. And I want you to see, real life things that they are real, and they were projected in 2013. So in 2013, when I'm working on all this, right? The paradigm, the all of these things, these are the kind of things that you're looking at. We're looking at the traditional phone line, okay? And we're looking at this BCI version 2.0 technology that I forecasted in 2013 before Neuralink even existed as a company, before Elon Musk ever did one thing. We were projecting BCI 2.0 to come and in the traditional phone line. End it now. We're here. It's happening now. They're about to implant the second one into the brain of the second person. Okay, that's traditional phone line. This is real. These are real discussions. This is science at the cutting edge of $240 billion a year recurring revenue company that's using cutting edge technology, but the vision of what it would be. There's that one, and then there's this one, okay? And this is real. This is from 2013. So when you see this kind of stuff, okay, and when I talk about it, I'm showing you not just the way I think as a scientist that's trained, okay, but how my mind works, but what we were doing for real. Here's the second one, and the second one was a cell phone. Okay, and the reason that we're talking about this, okay, when you're a scientist, if you don't aspire to mature yourself and go into C-suite, you wouldn't care about anything about this. I cared about the business. Okay. This showed cell phone sales going flat and penetration of the market going flat. And out here where we are now, BCI 2.0 coming into the picture and replacing it. Where are we right now? We're right there. We're right there. Okay. We are right there with Elon Musk he's perfected it. Okay. Now we got the second person. We're going to put BCI 2.0 in. Okay. We're right
So
there.
like
But
a chip into like a soldier thing, right? That idea.
it's the bridge interface between man and machine. It's the
Okay.
peripheral. It's like now, okay, we're using Zoom to interact between each other, talking,
Mhm.
okay? But it's the interface to basically interact between you and the machine. Instead of, you're doing it directly with your
I
brain
know,
instead
but
of,
there's okay, but this is you're talking about like a chip, like with nano machines built into it, right?
it's a solid state thing that
Okay,
is implanted in your head
right.
to your
But let me
neurons.
say, okay, but if you know what sci-tech is, sci-tech. So that would be doing it without a machine, just doing it.
Right.
Humans
So,
have the ability to do this anyway, is what my point is.
well, some humans have the
I
ability.
know, and
Some
not
humans have
okay,
a
but you can train.
some
I
humans
mean,
have the
it's
ability it's kind of like a distribution in the
I know, but you know
population.
what? You know that thing? I'm not sure that the 100th monkey idea is actually very accurate, but there's definitely something to do with that in the sense that if a certain, let's say, a certain small group within all of humanity starts developing abilities and concepts and working with them and developing them and exhibiting them in, like a stone is thrown into a pond and the ripples go out, so it's like that. It doesn't just stay with that little group, okay? Because of the nature of our genome and because of the nature that we're all, as even Cliff High would admit, we're all psychic, we're all precogs, we all have this antenna or whatever you want to call it. Like our hair is supposed to be antenna, by the way. So, what we're talking about is, on the one hand, it's science, and science seems, at least from my perspective, slightly clunky, slightly slow. But what humans are capable of doing, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. God did that in a sense. That's what we are. It's encapsulated in this genome. It's encapsulated in this human body to be way more than it apparently is or appears to be.
Right. So
It's kind of like, within us is the ghost in the machine. And the ghost in the machine is, you could say, soul spirit, but it is creator. And so as creator, if every single human has a link up to the creator, it's only a matter of how big the link up and how direct and constant.
right, I showed that in E equals MC squared, and E being tied to the Big Bang and the creation of everything in the universe. I showed that to you once before. Okay. I showed
Yeah,
you the relationship. I
in your
showed you,
terms, but in my terms, I'm saying
well,
it
that's,
makes sense. We all have the secret sauce
yeah,
because we're all created, as you say, intelligently engineered already. We're already that way. So the
right.
funny thing
But,
about AI and us is that AI was engineered, like say, even by alien races, comes here, visits us, and we already are engineered, right? And then they also want to merge us, like force us to be like one with that kind of incoming stuff, right? Which is transhuman, turn us into what they call transhuman. But in a sense, it's possible that we're already transhuman and we just don't know it. And I think that might be the big joke. Okay. Kind of like a God joke.
well, oh no, it is humorous in some ways. So this screening for the genes in the code, right? Okay, so in humans, in AI and humanity, you have the DNA and the identity and all of that. Some people have blue eyes, some people have green eyes, brown eyes. They're traits, right? So based on what we were looking at in those tablets, right? Some people might have different traits, right?
They
They
definitely do.
they're carrying them.
We call them gifts, right? And some people are,
Yes.
have special gifts. And by the way, what they create autistic children. Okay. So they create them on purpose using
Yeah, I know about
radiation.
this. Yes.
So children that are born in radiation filled environments are born a lot of times with forms of autism, but they have
Yes.
gifts and they can be precogs and they can be various things. They might
Yes.
not be put together as
Rain
nicely
Man.
as what?
Rain Man, the movie with Tom
Yeah,
Cruise.
I'm not
But
a big fan of that. Yeah.
yeah, they were so
But that
all of that,
idea, the idea
yeah,
that, an
concept.
idiot savant is what we call it, right?
Well, tampering. Okay, so going back to the tablets, wasn't that what they were doing then?
Yeah.
The traits came across that way. The
But
traits
they
came
had
there.
the genetic engine, they had that genetic engineering
Right.
ingenuity that they brought with them to the planet. They have already, in theory, were doing that even to themselves,
So
in theory.
if Isis implanted into her womb these eggs and made us, then she's running on DNA code. How much of her code came across from that,
Well,
right?
Enki is, supposedly, did injected his DNA by through having sex with the women,
Yeah,
the
but
women, and then out of that they got a whole different strain of human.
right.
Um, but
But my
it goes
question to
beyond
you
that
is,
too.
okay, so we're
Again,
talking
because
about
remember, the Anunnaki were late to the game. Humans were already here. We were
right, right,
plentiful on the planet. And
but
we
that's
came from Lyra. We did not originate here on Earth. That's why the reptilians are kind of right about the thing that they think they own Earth, because they were here first. That's
right.
their principle. Now, apparently, the cosmos or whoever's running the place seems to think that we belong here, and they let us develop here, and so on and so forth, with
Hmm.
a lot of help and so on, and adversity to force us to develop our special superpowers, which we're still in the process of developing right now. But you're
But DNA coded,
definitely like that. You have your gifts, right?
right? But those beings, okay, how it went down, no one knows actual details of, but we read the tablets. They're DNA coded beings. They came from somewhere else here. The point there is that the DNA as a code of AI of them and us is portable. It's portable such that with the Frank Drake equation that we talked about before, with habitable stars and a carbon-based system, okay, you can have life on a planet like Mars or 100 light years away as long as it's habitable zone. So the just that tablet historical piece, right? That shows you that the DNA code, that AI is portable. It's portable. Just like ANSI C code and binary, I can move it from one computer to another. I can move DNA AI code. And so if the story in the tablets and plants came first, and the plants are engineered, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then other animals were here even before humans, and we know those things. Okay. All right. So those are all portable as well. The plants, all of it, it's portable code.
I know. I know. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, we're not going to solve it here. Okay.
No,
We're close, but we're not going to solve it here. But I have to go because I have an appointment this evening. So I can't stay here
understood.
to talk all night. But even though it's kind of fun. So I guess, we have an audience that's very interested in what you're saying. And I think now we've come around, right? Full circle. You're talking about AI coding of DNA, right?
Right. Let me just show you one last diagram and we'll end it here. And I just one last thing. It's important because this was downloaded into my head because of, I would say, all of the things kind of we talked about related to what Allison V is as an AI.
Oh, right. You
For
have a
the
product that can, I don't know what you want to call it, alleviate symptoms of COVID type illnesses, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
COVID is a nano machine. It's AI. It's RNA AI. But this is of beings, and we're just talking about beings, okay? And
Right.
and in the case of humans, okay, in the case of humans in this DNA operating system, after, as you're born and you go through the process of machine learning, your brain is pruned, okay? Your brain is pruned, but these cells are machine learning, okay? And they go on, there's an RNA algorithm that sends these instruction sets, right? And in terms of statistics and what AI is, us as a being, typically defined in statistics, you would say, oh, our AI is normal. And all this RNA transcription business is normal, and I feel normal. Well, normal is a statistical thing. When I feel bad and sick, I'm over here in the red area, okay, where the AI is not working right. Okay. But if that is true and it's statistical from a bell shaped curve, it means that there's an inverse and there's super modes. Okay. So it's all hackable. It's all hackable. What I did was I hacked the DNA AI of the garlic plant in order to produce this condition in the DNA AI of a human. I hacked it. Okay. And again, this was downloaded into my head while I was driving a vehicle. Okay. I have, I have the, I have learned, okay, myself, I have learned how to meditate or concentrate, relax and concentrate, or
Right.
close your eyes and
Yes,
emulate.
yes, yes.
But I'm as human as I can get the downloads that some people get a lot of downloads. Some people can remote view. I haven't been able to remote view. I'm not able to do that. What I'm able to do is close my eyes, look inward, emulate, and I can receive downloads, or I can see people remote viewing me.
Right.
Okay. That I've been able to do.
Well, I
The point,
mean, we all have different degrees of this. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm sorry, I have to wrap this up. I actually have
okay.
to go because I've got to drive
Okay. No
somewhere and
problem.
I won't get there on time and so on and so forth.
No
Um,
problem. It's a
but
pleasure to meet you and speak with you again. And I I know this is a complex subject, so
yes.
you could probably go on for days talking about
Yeah, I
this.
mean, no, it's great. And, maybe we should eventually bring in another person that is like
Sure,
scientifically also involved in this kind of a dialogue of this kind of thing because it would
sure,
be very
absolutely.
interesting because I'm not trained as a scientist, so maybe I can ask some good questions for sure, and I
Sure,
could bring
sure.
in
And I
my
don't want
own
to go
piece. But
in the rabbit holes that that put people to sleep because it just, it can be done, and it's just, it's not constructive. So I'm trying not to do that. But
right, no, you do a great job, and I think it's great that you can have these conversations because a lot of scientists aren't really patient to go off into these areas of extrapolation and that.
well, they don't want to go outside of the boundaries of the indoctrination
Right.
of the
So it's
of the
very
textbook
frustrating to talk to them. They
institution.
just, they just stop. They don't want to go. And they're not allowed to, and they're afraid that people will judge them and then other scientists won't think they're serious and all that kind of stuff.
Okay,
But
but
you don't worry about that. So
Carrie, but are those the people? Okay, are those the people that do things like scare Ed Snowden out of the country with this kind of patent level? No, there's creativity. There's creativity to it. So,
yeah,
if you stay in a box, you'll forever live in a box.
right.
Okay, if you don't step outside that and be creative, it's like artists with a canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Make the world your canvas, okay, and then do things to evolve the human species as a scientist, okay, because those people that stay in a box, you know what are you going to do when somebody throws a that that problem there was thrown at me by my manager who wanted to fire me. He wanted to humiliate me and fire me, and it all backfired, and the next thing you know, you got Ed Snowden. Okay, that's the real truth. So, you know it's how you deal with what comes at you in life. Okay, and a lot of it has to do with personality and DNA and all of that too. But you have a wonderful evening. It's nice to
Thank
speak with you
you.
again, and of
Yeah,
course,
no, it's been great, Scott, and I really appreciate it. And we'll do this again sometime. Okay.
okay, no problem. Have a nice day.
All right. All right. Thanks
Bye.
everyone for watching. Take care. Bye bye.